She has never earned a single dollar in her life. She is a fraud and a parasite. My sister screamed those words at the federal judge demanding I be stripped of our late father's trust fund. She thought she had me completely cornered. She genuinely believed I was just her broke, pathetic younger sister who had done nothing since our father passed away. She smiled at the gallery, confident in her victory. But then my lawyer stepped forward and handed the judge a single sealed envelope. The judge opened the file, his face completely drained of color, and he looked right at my sister before saying two words that destroyed her entire world. All rise. My name is Jada. I am 32 years old, and for the last 5 years I have let my toxic family believe I was an absolute failure. They needed a scapegoat to feel better about their own empty lives, and I was perfectly fine playing the part in the shadows. But tonight at my mother's extravagant 60th birthday gala, their arrogance finally crossed the line of no return. The music was blasting through the massive ballroom of a rented estate in the heart of Buckhead. Atlanta's black elite filled the room. Politicians, business moguls, and my mother Vivica's sorority sisters were all dripping in diamonds and custom couture. Waiters walked around carrying silver trays of expensive champagne. My mother was holding court at the center table wearing a custom silver gown, soaking up the attention she craved more than oxygen. I stood near the back of the room by the garden doors, wearing a simple black dress, sipping a glass of sparkling water. I preferred to stay out of the way. My presence alone usually irritated my mother, who always made it clear that I lacked the social grace and the ambition of my older sister Sasha. Sasha was standing near the stage with her husband Trey. They were the golden couple of the family. Sasha was wearing a dress that cost more than most people make in a month, and Trey was flashing a watch that could pay off a mortgage. They styled themselves as real estate moguls, the ultimate power couple of Atlanta. Everyone in the room adored them. The jazz band suddenly stopped playing. Sasha tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback echoing through the massive ballroom. The conversations died down, and hundreds of eyes turned toward the stage. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate my beautiful mother, Vivica," Sasha announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. The crowd applauded. Sasha smiled perfectly for the cameras flashing around the room. "Family is everything to us. Legacy is everything. My husband Trey and I work hard every day to build our empire so we can honor the legacy my late father DeAndre left behind." She paused and her eyes scanned the crowd until they locked onto me standing in the shadows. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated smirk. "Speaking of legacy," Sasha said into the microphone, her voice carrying an edge of poison. "Jada, why do you not come up here to the front? Come on up, little sister. Do not be shy." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Hundreds of judgmental eyes stared at me. I could see my mother at the VIP table rolling her eyes and shaking her head in disgust as I walked forward. I kept my face completely blank. I walked up to the edge of the stage looking up at my sister. "What is this about Sasha?" I asked calmly, keeping my voice low. Sasha did not lower her voice. She wanted an audience. She reached onto the podium and picked up a massive, thick legal binder. Without warning, she threw it down. It hit the marble floor right at my feet with a loud, heavy thud. People in the front row gasped. "Consider that my gift to the family," Sasha said loudly into the microphone. "That is a formal lawsuit, Jada. I am taking you to court to strip you of your half of Dad's trust fund. You are cut off." Whispers erupted across the ballroom. My mother took a slow sip of her champagne, looking incredibly satisfied. She knew about this. They had planned this public humiliation together. "You have lived like a ghost in a cheap apartment for 5 years since Dad died," Sasha continued, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "While Trey and I built a real estate empire, you have done absolutely nothing with your life. You have no career, you have no ambition. You just sit around waiting for that monthly trust fund deposit." I looked down at the binder, then back up at her. "The trust fund was divided equally by Dad. You have no legal right to touch my half." Sasha laughed, a sharp, condescending sound. "Actually, I do. You clearly never read the fine print in Dad's will. The trust explicitly states that the beneficiary must hold gainful employment and actively contribute to society to receive the funds. You are a lazy, unemployed parasite, Jada. You do not even have a job. You bring shame to the family name, and I am taking back Dad's money before you waste it all. Trey stepped up beside Sasha, wrapping his arm around her waist, looking down at me with pure arrogance. We gave you enough time to get your life together, Jada. You chose to be a failure. Do not embarrass yourself by fighting us in court. You cannot afford to lose. The humiliation was supposed to crush me. They wanted me to cry, to beg, to run out of the ballroom in tears so they could play the victims burdened by a troubled relative. My mother leaned over to her wealthy friends, shaking her head as if I were a tragedy she had to endure. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I slowly bent down and picked up the heavy legal binder. I brushed off a speck of dust from the cover. I looked right into Sasha's eyes and I smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it made her flinch. Are you done performing for your audience? I asked, my voice steady and completely unbothered. I am saving our father's legacy from you, Sasha snapped, gripping the microphone stand. You have never earned a single dollar on your own. You are pathetic. If you say so, Sasha, I replied calmly. I will see you in court. I turned my back on them and walked away. The whispers grew louder as I navigated through the crowd. People stepped out of my way, as if I had a contagious disease. I could feel the burning stares of my mother's friends, judging my simple dress, judging my silence, judging the failure they thought I was. What none of them knew, what my sister and her flashy husband could not possibly comprehend, was that their entire attack was based on a massive illusion. They called me unemployed. They called me a parasite. They thought my cheap apartment was proof of my poverty. They had no idea that for the past 5 years I had been building a financial fortress. I am the secret founder and sole chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, a private equity firm that currently manages over $300 million in assets. The cheap apartment was just a place to sleep while I worked 100-hour weeks. My simple clothes were a choice, not a necessity. I did not need to flash designer labels because I owned the shopping centers where they bought them. Sasha and Trey loved to brag about their real estate empire, but I knew the dark truth behind their glittering facade. I knew their empire was built on quicksand. I knew they were drowning in debt, desperately trying to keep up appearances for the Atlanta elite. This lawsuit was not about protecting our father's legacy. It was a desperate cash grab by two people who were secretly going bankrupt. I walked out the grand front doors of the estate, leaving the music and the fake smiles behind me. The cool night air of Atlanta felt refreshing. I handed my ticket to the valet and waited for my unassuming sedan to be brought around. Trey jogged out of the front doors, catching up to me before my car arrived. He wanted to make sure the knife was twisted deep. He stood uncomfortably close, smelling like expensive cologne and cheap desperation. You think you are so smart walking away without a fight? Trey said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the valet could not hear. But you are going to fight, and you are going to lose. Is that right, Trey? I asked, looking straight ahead. I manage your mother's finances, Jada. I know exactly how much money flows through your accounts. I know you are broke. I have already contacted the bank and frozen your primary debit cards pending the litigation. You do not have a dime to hire a lawyer to fight us. Go back to the slums, Jada. You are finished. He smirked, adjusting his suit jacket, thinking he had just delivered the fatal blow. He walked back into the party looking like a man who owned the world. My car pulled up. I tipped the valet, got into the driver's seat, and closed the door. The moment I was alone in the quiet cabin of my car, I let out a soft laugh. Trey had just frozen my primary bank account. The account they all knew about. The decoy account. I checked my phone app. The balance in that frozen account was exactly $412. He thought he had cut off my air supply. He had no idea he had just activated a trap I had been setting for years. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and dialed a number. It rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. Good evening, Jada. How was the birthday gala? Hello, Elijah, I said, putting my car into gear and driving away from the estate. The gala was incredibly enlightening. Sasha served me with the lawsuit right in front of the entire party. They are coming after the trust. Elijah chuckled softly on the other end of the line. He was a brilliant Ivy League-educated attorney who had been managing the legal side of Vanguard Holdings since the beginning. He was the only person who knew my entire double life. They actually went through with it, Elijah said. claiming you are unemployed. Yes, and Trey just took the bait. He cornered me outside and bragged about freezing the decoy account. They think I am completely broke and defenseless. Perfect, Elijah said, his tone shifting into business mode. They are acting exactly as we predicted, blinded by their own arrogance. They think they are hunting a mouse, but they just woke up a lion. Shall we begin the counter-offensive? Not yet, I replied, steering onto the highway, watching the city lights of Atlanta glow in the distance. Let them celebrate tonight. Let them think they have won. Let them get so confident that they start making careless mistakes. I want them to put their lies on the legal record. Once they commit to their fraud in writing, there will be no way out for them. Understood, Madam CEO, Elijah said respectfully. I will prepare the corporate documentation. When they finally see your real tax returns, the shock alone might put your sister in the hospital. Just make sure the trap is airtight, Elijah. They want to play games with our father's money. I am going to show them what real power looks like. I am on it. Have a good night, Jada. I ended the call and drove into the night. My family wanted a war over wealth and status. They wanted to humiliate me and leave me with nothing. They had no idea they had just handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy their fake empire and take back everything they had stolen. The game had officially begun, and I held all the winning cards. Right now, they felt completely victorious, drinking their expensive champagne and collecting the congratulations of their equally shallow friends. Sasha probably believed she had finally crushed the younger sister she had resented for decades. Trey likely thought he had secured a massive payday to cover up his own catastrophic financial failures. Vivica. My mother was undoubtedly spinning the situation to her friends, painting herself as the tragic matriarch forced to practice tough love on a wayward child. Their delusions were practically poetic. I smiled as I merged onto the interstate, pressing the accelerator down, heading toward my actual home. The storm was coming for them. They just could not see the clouds yet. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, cutting off the jazz music and the murmurs of Atlanta's high society. The humid summer air wrapped around my shoulders, carrying the sweet scent of expensive floral arrangements my mother imported for this evening. I walked toward the valet stand, my steps steady and unhurried on the cobblestone driveway. I handed my ticket to the attendant, breathing the scent of jasmine from the manicured gardens. I simply wanted to get home, take off my heels, and enjoy the quiet comfort of my space. Before my car was brought around the driveway, I heard the aggressive crunch of leather shoes marching up behind me. I did not even need to turn around to know who it was. The overwhelming scent of his overpriced designer cologne gave his identity away instantly. It was Trey. Sasha's incredibly arrogant husband could not resist the urge to twist the knife he thought they had plunged into my back. He stepped directly into my personal space, puffing out his chest to tower over me. He wanted to intimidate me without causing a scene in front of the valet staff who were watching us closely. You think you are so smart, walking away without a fight? Trey sneered, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that dripped with complete disdain. You think your little silent treatment makes you look strong. But you are going to have to fight us, Jada, and you are going to lose miserably. We have the absolute best legal team in the entire state of Georgia. Is that right, Trey? I asked, staring straight ahead into the dark, quiet street, completely refusing to grant him the satisfaction of eye contact. I manage your mother's finances now, Jada, he said, a sickeningly proud smirk spreading across his face. I control the entire flow of money in this family. I know exactly how much cash is sitting in your pathetic little bank account right now. In fact, I have already contacted the bank and frozen your primary debit cards pending the upcoming litigation. He leaned in much closer, his tone dripping with absolute malice and unearned superiority. You do not have a single dime to hire a lawyer to fight us. You are completely cut off from the entire world. You are broke. Go back to the slums, Jada. You are finished. We are taking the trust fund, and you will never see a single penny of your father's wealth. He adjusted his custom-tailored suit jacket, looking incredibly satisfied with himself. He honestly believed he was an absolute financial mastermind. He truly thought he had just delivered a fatal, paralyzing blow that would leave me begging for mercy on my knees by morning. I finally turned my head and looked at him, studying the desperate, rigid tension hiding just behind his falsely confident eyes. A truly wealthy, secure man does not ever need to corner a woman in a parking lot to brag about cutting her off. A truly wealthy man does not sweat nervously through his silk shirt when threatening his younger sister-in-law. He was bleeding money, and he urgently needed my half of the trust fund to plug the massive catastrophic holes in his rapidly sinking real estate business. My modest, unassuming gray sedan finally pulled up to the curb. The valet hurried over and opened the door for me. I pulled a crisp $20 bill from my small clutch and handed it to the attendant, thanking him warmly for his quick service. I turned back to Trey, giving him one last polite, completely unbothered smile. "Have a wonderful evening, Trey," I said softly, my voice perfectly smooth. "Try not to drink too much champagne tonight. You have a very long, difficult road ahead of you." I slid into the driver's seat and closed the heavy door, completely shutting out his furious, highly confused expression. As I rolled the window up, I saw him glaring at my cheap car, shaking his head in absolute disgust, before turning around to march back inside the mansion. The moment I was entirely alone inside the quiet, soundproof cabin of my car, I let out a deep, genuine laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, filling the empty space with pure amusement. Trey had just proudly confessed to illegally freezing my primary bank account. He thought he had successfully cut off my vital life support. He had absolutely no idea that the specific account he just froze was nothing more than a carefully planted decoy. 5 years ago, when my father passed away, and I realized my mother and sister were going to let Trey manage the family estate, I knew I had to protect myself immediately. I knew they would eventually try to use my father's money as a brutal weapon against me. They were obsessed with control and terrified of losing their elite status. So I set up a basic, everyday checking account at a local community branch. I routed a tiny, insignificant fraction of my actual income into it, just enough to cover cheap rent, basic groceries, and utility bills. I deliberately made sure it looked exactly like the struggling, depleted bank account of a failed, unemployed young woman. I stopped at a red light, opened my highly secure banking app on my phone, and glanced at the frozen balance. It contained exactly $412. Trey was currently celebrating inside that lavish party over freezing $400. He honestly believed that was my entire net worth. He thought he had cornered a helpless, terrified mouse. He did not know he had just blindly walked into a heavily fortified cage with a starving lion. While my sister and her husband spent the last 5 years buying luxury sports cars they could not actually afford, and hosting extravagant parties to impress people who did not care about them, I was quietly building an absolute financial fortress. I am the secret founder and sole chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings. My private equity firm manages over $300 million in global assets. I own towering commercial skyscrapers downtown. I own massive, highly profitable tech startups. I personally employ hundreds of brilliant people across the entire country. My cheap apartment was just a comfortable, quiet place to sleep while I worked grueling 100-hour weeks to build my empire from the ground up without their toxic interference. My simple clothes were a highly strategic choice, not a painful necessity. I did not need to wear flashy designer labels because my company literally owned the high-end shopping districts where Sasha spent all of her heavily borrowed money. Trey freezing that decoy account was the absolute best thing that could have possibly happened tonight. It proved exactly what my legal team and I had suspected for months. He was willing to use illegal, highly unethical financial tactics to secure a win. By freezing my personal assets without a proper court order, using his broker credentials improperly to manipulate a bank manager, he had just committed a massive federal violation. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and their desperate need to maintain their social status that they were making incredibly sloppy, catastrophic mistakes. I merged onto the highway, the bright city lights of Atlanta streaking past my tinted windows. The warm night felt electric. The game had officially started, and my opponents were playing with their eyes completely closed. I pressed a button on my steering wheel, connecting my phone to the car's Bluetooth system. I dialed a highly encrypted, secure number. It rang only twice before a deep, calm, incredibly sharp voice answered the line. "Good evening, Jada. How was the grand birthday gala?" my lawyer asked. His name was Elijah. He was 40 years old, a brilliant Ivy League-educated attorney who had been managing the complex legal architecture of Vanguard Holdings since the very beginning. He was fiercely loyal, notoriously ruthless in a federal courtroom, and the only person on earth who knew the full extent of my hidden double life. "Hello, Elijah," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the dark road ahead. The gala was incredibly enlightening. Sasha served me with the lawsuit right in front of the entire party. "They are coming after the trust fund, just like we predicted." Elijah chuckled softly on the other end of the line. The sound was rich with eager anticipation. "They actually went through with it," he said. "They are claiming you are completely unemployed and violating the strict terms of your father's will." "Yes," I replied, pressing the accelerator slightly. And Trey just took the bait perfectly. He followed me out to the valet stand and bragged about freezing the decoy account. He wants me to panic. Let them think I am entirely broke. It is time to let them dig their own graves. "Excellent," Elijah said, his tone instantly shifting into strict, focused business mode. "They are acting exactly according to our projections. They think they are hunting a helpless target, but they just initiated their own guaranteed destruction. By freezing that account without legal authority, Trey just handed us the first piece of undeniable evidence for a federal wire fraud investigation. Shall we begin the corporate counteroffensive tomorrow morning?" "Not yet," I instructed, firmly navigating the winding highway curves. "I want them to feel completely victorious right now. I want them to get so overly confident that they start making careless, desperate mistakes. We need them to formally submit their lies into the legal record. Once they commit to their massive fraud in writing, there will be absolutely no way out for them." "Understood, Madam CEO," Elijah said respectfully. "I will prepare the corporate documentation to reveal Vanguard Holdings when the time is absolutely right. When they finally see your real tax returns, the shock alone might put your arrogant sister in the hospital. Just make sure the trap is perfectly airtight, Elijah." I said, my voice hardening with pure resolve. "They want to play nasty games with my father's legacy. I am going to show them what real unstoppable power actually looks like." "I will have everything ready," he promised solemnly. "Have a good night, Jada." I ended the call. The highway stretched out before me, calm and perfectly quiet. My family wanted a brutal war over wealth and status. They wanted to humiliate me and leave me with nothing but shame. They had no idea they had just handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy their fake empire and take back everything they had stolen. The storm was finally coming for them. The very next morning, the illusion they so desperately clung to began to crack. I was sitting in my private home office reviewing the quarterly earnings report for Vanguard Holdings when my secure personal line rang. The caller ID showed Atlanta First Trust, the banking institution that managed my late father's estate. I answered the call expecting a routine update from my wealth manager. Instead, I heard the frantic, hushed voice of a junior bank manager named Kevin. He sounded completely terrified, whispering into the receiver, as if he were hiding from a real physical threat inside his own building. "Ms. Brooks," Kevin stammered, his voice trembling with obvious anxiety. "I am so sorry to bother you directly, but your mother and your sister are currently sitting in the VIP lounge downstairs. They are causing a massive scene. They are demanding immediate access to the primary trust accounts and insisting that we prepare a formal relinquishment of assets document for you to sign right now." I leaned back in my leather chair, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. They were moving even faster than Elijah and I had anticipated. Panic is a highly powerful and incredibly predictable motivator. Trey financial bleeding must be significantly worse than his public records indicated if they were trying to force a blind transfer less than 12 hours after the birthday gala. "Calm down, Kevin," I said, evenly projecting absolute authority. "Do not authorize any transfers. Do not pull any funds. Print the blank relinquishment forms they are asking for and put them in the VIP lounge. I will be there in 20 minutes to handle them personally." I hung up the phone and changed into a sleek, tailored navy blazer and matching trousers. It was time to quickly face my greedy family. I bypassed my usual understated sedan and opted for the tinted luxury vehicle my security team usually drove. If we were playing a psychological game of intimidation today, I was going to command the entire room from the second I arrived. I navigated the busy morning Atlanta traffic with absolute focus, my mind sharp and ready for the confrontation. When I arrived at the bank, the branch manager immediately intercepted me at the entrance. He looked incredibly relieved to see me and quickly escorted me to the frosted glass doors of the highly exclusive VIP financial suite located perfectly downstairs. I opened the door and walked inside. The lounge was dripping in rich mahogany and brushed steel designed specifically to make wealthy clients feel untouchable. My mother Vivica sat on a plush cream sofa, wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, sipping an espresso as if she owned the entire banking institution. Sasha paced the length of the room, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She wore a sharp white power suit, clearly trying to project the image of a ruthless, unstoppable businesswoman. When the heavy door clicked shut behind me, they both turned quickly around to face me. Sasha stopped pacing and crossed her arms over her chest, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh of annoyance. "It took you long enough," Sasha snapped, glaring at my outfit. "I have an important board meeting in an hour, Jada. We do not have time to wait around for you to figure out public transportation." I ignored her completely and took a seat in the single leather chair across from the glass coffee table. Between us sat a crisp stack of legal documents and a heavy gold pen. I looked directly at my mother, waiting patiently and quietly for her words. Vivica slowly took off her sunglasses and placed them on the table. She looked at me not as a loving daughter, but as a minor inconvenience she needed to swat away. "Let us make this quick and painless, Jada," my mother said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "You embarrassed the entire family by walking out of my birthday gala last night. But we are willing to forgive your little temper tantrum if you do the right thing today. Pick up the pen and sign the relinquishment form immediately." I looked down at the dense legal documents incredibly closely, carefully. It was a legally binding transfer of assets. By signing it, I would willingly surrender my entire 50% share of DeAndre's trust fund directly into Sasha's personal corporate accounts. "You want me to sign over my entire inheritance?" I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Based on a baseless lawsuit you filed against me last night." My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, judgmental slits. "We are trying to save this family's reputation from your constant failures. You were never brilliant like Sasha. You never applied yourself or cared about our overall social standing and excellence. You did not even pledge my sorority at Howard. You went to that cheap state school and disappeared into absolute mediocrity. You do not understand how the real world works, Jada." I stared at her, absorbing the staggering depth of her lifelong favoritism. "And Sasha does?" I asked politely, keeping my face perfectly still. "Sasha is building an empire," my mother snapped, slamming her hand against the armrest of the sofa. "Her company is just facing a temporary cash flow issue because of the changing market. Trey needs immediate liquid capital to secure a massive commercial property right here downtown. Give her your half of the trust. It is the only way to protect your father's legacy. You do not even have a career to invest it in." The absolute audacity of her words hung in the quiet air of the VIP lounge. She honestly believed that her youngest daughter was entirely worthless. She was openly admitting that she wanted to rob me blind, just to fund Sasha's failing lifestyle and maintain her own illusion of high society dominance. My father had spent his entire life building that wealth with his bare hands to ensure our thoroughly secure financial future. And here was my mother perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves to subsidize Trey's catastrophic gambling on the commercial real estate market. Sasha stepped closer to the table, towering over me, trying to use her physical presence to intimidate me into total submission. "Sign the paper, Jada," Sasha demanded, pointing a long acrylic nail directly at the signature line. "You do not have the money to fight my lawyers. If you force us to take this to trial, we will make sure you are held responsible for all of our expensive legal fees without any hesitation or remorse. You will be buried in debt for the rest of your pathetic life. Just sign the document, take your little monthly allowance from Mom, and go back to your miserable apartment." I looked at the gold pen resting on top of the documents. I thought about the $300 million sitting securely in my Vanguard Holdings corporate accounts. I thought about the fact that I was actively negotiating to buy the very commercial building Trey was desperately trying to lease. They were so incredibly blind. They were playing checkers while I was moving chess pieces effectively globally around them. I reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen. Sasha smirked, exchanging a highly victorious look with my mother. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought their aggressive tactics and cruel insults had successfully bullied the weak, unemployed younger sister into handing over millions of dollars. I held the pen between my fingers, feeling its weight. I looked at the signature line. Then I looked up at my mother. "You really think a temporary cash flow issue is all that is wrong with Sasha's company?" I asked quietly, letting a hint of complete mockery show right now. "I do not need to explain high-level finance to someone who cannot even hold down a minimum wage job," Vivica sneered. "Sign the document, Jada. Do not make me completely disown you. If you walk out of this room without signing that paper, you are no longer my daughter. I will have you permanently blacklisted from every social circle in Atlanta. You will be a total outcast. No one will ever speak to you again." The threat was supposed to be the ultimate weapon. In her shallow world, elite social standing was the only currency that truly mattered here. I set the gold pen down with deliberate, terrifying precision. I slowly stood up, smoothing my tailored trousers quite effortlessly. I looked at my sister, whose victorious smirk was rapidly melting into a highly confused frown. "If you want half of the trust fund," I said, my voice carrying a lethal, unshakable authority, "you are going to have to take it from me in front of a federal judge. But I promise you both, by the time we are done in that courtroom, there will not be a single piece of your fake empire left standing." I walked away. The massive storm was finally coming. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta, my phone was vibrating off my nightstand. Missed calls from extended family were piling up. I opened social media to find the source of the outrage. It did not take long. Sasha was broadcasting live on Instagram. She was sitting in her lavish kitchen wearing no makeup, wiping away fake tears with a tissue. "I just ask for your prayers today." Sasha sniffled into the camera, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "My family is going through a devastating matter. My younger sister Jada has been struggling for years. She refuses to work. She refuses to seek help. And now she is trying to maliciously sue our elderly mother to drain her retirement funds and steal our late father's legacy. Trey and I must draw a hard boundary to protect our family." People in her live feed were calling me an addict who deserved to be cut off. Sasha was playing her favorite role as the savior. It was the exact same tactic she used when we were in high school. She once crashed her convertible, then convinced our parents that I had stolen the keys. Sasha never took accountability. She just found a convenient target. I locked my phone screen. I did not feel an ounce of panic. I did not feel the need to jump onto the internet and desperately defend my character to strangers. I stepped into my walk-in closet and bypassed my simple clothing. I pulled out a custom-tailored charcoal gray power suit. I paired it with a white blouse and black stilettos. The timid sister they thought they knew was officially dead. I grabbed my briefcase, walked past my decoy sedan, and got into my private luxury SUV. I pulled up to a sleek glass skyscraper in the commercial district. There were no neon signs, just an underground parking garage. I parked in my reserved spot near the VIP elevator. The moment I stepped out of the vehicle, my entire posture shifted. I was no longer the outcast daughter. I swiped my encrypted keycard and entered the private elevator. The elevator shot straight up to the top floor. I stepped out into the penthouse suite of Vanguard Holdings. The reception area featured floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. "Good morning, Madam CEO," the front desk executive said, standing up immediately. "Good morning," I replied, walking past glass offices, where my analysts were already hard at work. I had built this empire from the ground up, turning a modest initial investment into a private equity juggernaut that dictated the financial pulse of the city. I opened the heavy double doors to my corner office. Elijah was already there, sitting at the conference table, sipping his black coffee and reviewing a stack of financial documents. He looked up and gave me a sharp, acknowledging nod. "The smear campaign has officially begun," I said, dropping my briefcase onto the polished mahogany desk. Sasha is crying on the internet telling the city that I am an unemployed parasite trying to bankrupt our mother. Elijah laughed, tapping his tablet screen. Her timing is incredibly ironic, considering what my forensic accounting team just uncovered this morning. Please take a seat, Jada. You are going to want to see the financial reality of your sister's fake empire. I sat across from him and pulled the tablet closer. The screen displayed a complex web of corporate registries, bank transfers, and public financial filings that Elijah had pulled using back channels and public records. Trey loves to call himself a real estate mogul. Elijah began pointing to a series of highlighted numbers. But his entire business model is a catastrophic Ponzi scheme. He has been taking on massive high-interest loans to acquire commercial properties. The problem is, his properties are bleeding money. They have terrible occupancy rates, and he cannot generate enough revenue to cover his exorbitant debt payments. I quietly studied the spreadsheets, watching the massive negative margins pile up month after month. So how is he keeping his company afloat? How is he paying for the designer clothes and cars? By robbing Peter to pay, Paul, Elijah stated bluntly. Trey is a licensed investment broker. He manages financial portfolios for an elite client list, which includes your mother. When his commercial real estate debts became due, Trey started illegally moving money out of his clients' investment accounts to cover his corporate losses. I felt a sharp chill run down my spine. He is actively embezzling money. Massive amounts of money, Elijah confirmed, pulling up a specific bank ledger. It gets much worse, Jada. We tracked the specific accounts he drained to cover his latest commercial loan default. He did not just steal from random clients. He liquidated your mother's primary retirement accounts. Vivica is completely destitute on paper, and she has absolutely no idea. I stared at the numbers in pure shock. My mother had worked tirelessly alongside my father for decades to build that retirement nest egg. She prided herself on her wealth and social standing. She had just hosted a birthday gala that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, completely unaware that the son-in-law she constantly praised was actively stealing every last dime to his name. What about my father's trust fund? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal tone. Elijah slid another document across the table. Trey siphoned $1.5 million directly out of DeAndre's trust fund 3 months ago. He tried to hide the transaction by routing it through a series of shell companies, but my team tracked the digital footprints perfectly. This is why Sasha threw that lawsuit at you last night. They desperately need the court to award them your half of the trust fund so they can legally replace the money Trey already stole before anyone notices. The sheer audacity of their plan was sickening. Sasha and Trey were not just greedy, they were absolute criminals. They were perfectly willing to destroy my reputation, paint me as an addict on the internet, and strip me of my rightful inheritance just to cover up their massive federal crimes. My mother was eagerly helping them do it, blinded by Trey's flashy charm and Sasha's golden child status. She was handing them the knife they were actively using to stab her in the back. This is federal wire fraud, I said, leaning back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. This is embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and grand larceny. If we hand these documents over to the authorities right now, Trey will be arrested by sunset, Elijah said, watching my reaction closely. We have enough evidence to put him away for 20 years. I looked at the forged ledgers. I thought about the smear campaign running on social media right now. I thought about the sheer humiliation my sister tried to put me through at the gala, throwing a binder at my feet like I was trash. Arresting Trey today would be too fast, too easy. It would not give them the brutal, agonizing downfall they deserved. No, I said firmly, my eyes locking onto Elijah. We do not call the authorities today. If we expose them now, Sasha will play the victim again. She will claim Trey tricked her, and she had no idea about the stolen money. My mother will bail her out, and they will find a way to escape the full weight of their actions. So what is the play, Madam CEO? Elijah asked, a fierce grin spreading across his face. We let them walk right into the courtroom, I commanded. We let them officially file their financial claims under penalty of perjury. Trey is going to need to submit my tax returns to the court to prove I am unemployed. Let him illegally forge those documents. Let him submit them to a federal judge. Once he commits perjury and fraud on the legal record, he will drag Sasha down with him. They are digging their own graves, Elijah agreed, closing the file folder. I will monitor his server access. The second he tries to pull your fake tax returns, we will let him download them without interruption. I stood up and walked over to the massive glass window looking down at the bustling city below. They thought I was a weak, pathetic target. They thought they could break me with social media rumors and intimidation tactics. They were about to learn that true power does not need to boast on the internet. True power operates in absolute silence until it is time to strike. Let Sasha cry her fake tears for her audience, I said, staring at the distant skyline. Let them enjoy their stolen money for a few more days. Because when we finally drop the hammer in that courtroom, I am going to make sure they lose absolutely everything. The trap was fully set, and Trey was practically sprinting toward the bait. 3 days after the disastrous birthday gala, I was sitting in Elijah's ultra-secure secondary office, located a few floors beneath the Vanguard Holdings penthouse. It was a windowless room lined with heavy servers and massive glowing monitors. This was Elijah's cybersecurity command center, run by a hand-picked team of elite digital forensics experts. We were tracking Trey's every single digital move in real time. "He is getting completely desperate," Elijah said, pointing to a sprawling timeline displayed on the main screen. He missed another massive loan payment yesterday. The bank managing his commercial real estate portfolio just issued a formal notice of default. If he does not produce a significant amount of liquid capital by the end of the month, they are going to seize his entire company. He needs your half of the trust fund immediately, or he is going to end up in federal prison for bankruptcy fraud. And to get my half of the trust fund, I said, leaning closer to the monitor, he needs to definitively prove to a federal judge that I am completely unemployed and violating the core terms of my late father's will. Exactly, Elijah confirmed. And how does a desperate, arrogant broker prove someone is broke? He produces their tax returns. Since Trey technically still manages the overarching family estate accounts, he has outdated residual access to your mother's primary financial portal. He knows your old social security number. He knows your previous addresses. He is going to try to use his broker credentials to generate a fake set of tax returns for you. I watched the screen closely. We had set up a highly sophisticated, completely isolated shadow server. It was designed to look exactly like the legitimate federal tax portal, but it was fully controlled by Vanguard's cybersecurity team. We had seeded it with forged, perfectly believable tax returns showing that I had earned absolutely zero income for the past 5 consecutive years. It was a digital honeypot, and Trey was buzzing right around it. He just logged in, one of the lead cybersecurity analysts, announced, his fingers flying across his keyboard. IP address confirmed. It is coming from Trey's private office network. He is using his broker ID to bypass the standard security protocols. He is actively searching for Jada's tax history. I felt a cold, sharp thrill run through my veins. He was actually doing it. He was committing federal wire fraud and identity theft in broad daylight, driven purely by his arrogant assumption that I was too stupid to ever catch him. He found the shadow files. The analyst reported the tension in the room rising sharply. He is viewing the fake tax returns right now. They show zero income, zero employment history, and zero assets. Elijah turned to me, his expression deadly serious. "Jada, I need your formal authorization right now. We can block his IP address immediately. We can lock him out of the system and report this unauthorized breach to the authorities today. If we stop him now, he gets a slap on the wrist for an attempted breach. But if we let him download those forged documents, and if he officially submits them to a federal judge as genuine evidence in the lawsuit against you, he is committing a massive felony. It will be a mandatory federal prison sentence. There will be absolutely no way for him to escape it." I stared at the blinking cursor on the monitor. I thought about the way Trey had cornered me in the parking lot at the gala, bragging about freezing my bank account. I thought about the way he had smirked, telling me to go back to the slums. I thought about the absolute hell he and Sasha had put me through, stealing my father's legacy to fund their pathetic fake lifestyle. "Do not block him," I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy. "Let him download every single forged document. Let him submit them to the federal judge. Let him walk right into the trap." The analyst nodded and stepped back from the keyboard. "He is initiating the download now," the analyst confirmed. The files have been successfully transferred to his local network. He has the fake tax returns. Elijah leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He just sealed his own fate. The moment his lawyers file those documents into the official court record, he commits perjury, fraud, and identity theft simultaneously. The federal judge will personally order his arrest. "He thinks he just found the magic bullet," I said, standing up and smoothing my tailored blazer. "He thinks those fake tax returns are going to win the lawsuit and hand him millions of dollars. Let him celebrate. Let him show Sasha the documents. Let them both believe they have finally defeated me." Over the next few days, the tension in Atlanta's high society circles reached a boiling point. Sasha's vicious smear campaign was in full swing. She posted daily updates on her social media accounts, painting herself as the tragic, long-suffering sister, trying to save her family from my destructive parasitic behavior. My mother's friends whispered about me at their country club luncheons. Extended family members who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly felt entitled to send me long, highly critical text messages demanding I stop hurting my mother and sister. I ignored every single one of them. I did not engage in internet drama. I did not defend myself to people who were eagerly waiting for my downfall. I simply woke up every morning, put on a sharp power suit, and drove to my penthouse office at Vanguard Holdings to manage my $300 million empire. I was busy aggressively expanding my commercial real estate portfolio, quietly buying up the very buildings Trey was desperately trying to lease to save his sinking company. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the disastrous birthday gala, Elijah walked into my corner office. He was holding a thick manila folder. He looked incredibly satisfied. "They did it," Elijah announced, dropping the folder onto my polished mahogany desk. Sasha and Trey's legal team just formally filed their preliminary evidence for the trust fund lawsuit. They officially submitted the forged tax returns to the federal court. They have formally sworn under penalty of severe perjury that these documents accurately represent your entire financial history. I opened the folder and reviewed the legal filings. Trey had actually signed an affidavit swearing he had legally obtained the tax returns through his capacity as the family's financial manager. He had proudly put his own signature on a massive federal crime. "They are incredibly arrogant," I noted, closing the folder. "They really believe no one will ever verify these documents. They think they are entirely untouchable." "They requested a mandatory pre-trial mediation session for tomorrow morning," Elijah said, taking a seat across from me. "They want to force a quick settlement. Trey is likely going to use these forged tax returns to threaten you. He will probably offer you a tiny, insulting fraction of the trust fund if you agree to walk away quietly and avoid a public trial." I smiled, looking out the massive window at the rain-slicked city streets. "Then we will gladly attend the mediation tomorrow," I replied. "Let them lay all their fake cards on the table. Let them threaten me. Let them feel like they have complete, absolute control over the situation. Because when we finally end this, I want them to fall from the highest possible peak." The next morning, the air in downtown Atlanta was thick and humid. I wore a simple, understated charcoal suit, maintaining the illusion of a struggling woman who was barely holding her life together. Elijah met me in the lobby of the prestigious high-rise law firm where the mediation was scheduled to take place. He carried only a slim, unassuming briefcase. "Are you ready to play your part, Madam CEO?" Elijah asked quietly as we stepped into the private elevator. "I was born ready for this," I replied, my face a mask of perfect, icy calm. We walked into the sprawling, glass-walled conference room. Sasha and Trey were already there, sitting on one side of a massive oak table. They had brought an entire team of 4 expensive, loud, incredibly aggressive corporate lawyers. Sasha was wearing a glaringly bright red designer dress, clearly dressing for an easy, guaranteed victory. Trey was leaning back in his expensive leather chair, checking his flashy watch, looking like a man who was about to collect a massive lottery payout. My mother, Vivica, sat at the far end of the table. She refused to even look at me when I walked into the room. She kept her eyes locked on her phone, perfectly playing the role of the deeply disappointed, highly distressed matriarch. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Sasha sneered as I took a seat across from her. "I honestly thought you would be too embarrassed to show your face today, Jada. But I guess desperation makes people do crazy things. Let us keep this professional." Sasha's lead attorney interrupted, though his tone was dripping with clear condescension. We are here to offer your client a very generous, highly structured settlement, despite her clear violation of the trust fund's mandatory employment stipulations. Trey leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the oak table. He stared directly at me, his eyes wide with malicious, unrestrained triumph. We have your tax returns, Jada Trey said slowly, emphasizing every single word to maximize the threat. We submitted them to the judge yesterday. We know you haven't earned a single dollar in 5 years. You are completely broke. You are a fraud. We have the absolute proof, and it is officially on the legal record. He smirked, waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to realize that I was completely, utterly destroyed. He had no idea that I was just waiting for him to finish digging his own grave. The following morning brought a heavy, suffocating humidity to downtown Atlanta. I chose a simple, understated charcoal suit, carefully maintaining the illusion of a deeply struggling woman who was barely holding her fragile life together. Elijah met me in the expansive marble lobby of the highly prestigious high-rise law firm where the mandatory pretrial mediation was scheduled to take place. He carried only a slim, incredibly unassuming leather briefcase. "Are you ready to play your part today, Madam CEO?" Elijah asked quietly, as we stepped into the private glass-walled elevator. "I was born ready for this," I replied, keeping my face a mask of perfect icy calm. We walked into a sprawling conference room offering a panoramic view of the city. Sasha and Trey were already there, sitting on one side of a massive polished oak table. They had brought an entire team of 4 expensive, loud, incredibly aggressive corporate lawyers. Sasha was wearing a glaringly bright red designer dress, clearly dressing for an easy, completely guaranteed victory. Trey was leaning far back in his expensive leather chair, checking his flashy custom watch, looking exactly like a man who was about to collect a massive, life-changing lottery payout. My mother Vivica sat at the far end of the long table. She aggressively refused to even look at me when I walked into the room. She kept her eyes entirely locked on her phone, perfectly playing the role of the deeply disappointed, highly distressed family matriarch who was simply exhausted by my mere existence. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Sasha sneered loudly as I took a seat directly across from her. "I honestly thought you would be far too embarrassed to even show your face today, Jada. But I guess pure, utter desperation makes people do absolutely crazy things. Let us keep this strictly professional," Sasha's lead attorney interrupted, though his tone was dripping with clear, unmistakable condescension. "We are here today to offer your client a very generous, highly structured settlement, despite her glaring, undeniable violation of the trust fund's mandatory employment stipulations." Trey suddenly leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the oak table. He stared directly at me, his eyes wide with malicious, unrestrained triumph. "We have your official tax returns, Jada," Trey said slowly, carefully emphasizing every single word to maximize the brutal threat. "We submitted them directly to the federal judge yesterday afternoon. We know you haven't earned a single dollar in over 5 years. You are completely broke. You are an absolute fraud. We have the undeniable proof, and it is officially on the legal record." He smirked, clearly waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to beg for mercy, waiting for me to realize that I was completely, utterly destroyed. Sasha leaned far across the polished table, her eyes flashing with pure, toxic superiority. "This isn't like high school when Dad bought you that expensive laptop so you could sit and code in your dark little room while I was actually out winning major pageants and building a real social network. Real life requires real money, Jada. You have absolutely none. Walk away right now, or we will completely humiliate you in open court." I maintained steady eye contact with my sister, letting the heavy, aggressive silence stretch across the massive room. They were practically salivating, completely convinced that their forged documents had successfully checkmated me. "My client rejects your settlement offer entirely," Elijah stated calmly, not even bothering to open his slim briefcase. "We decline mediation. We will see you in federal court." Sasha's lead attorney actually laughed out loud, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, counselor. We have concrete, irrefutable federal tax documents proving your client is entirely unemployed. If you force us to litigate this, We will ensure she is held fully responsible for all of our extensive legal fees. She will be buried in crushing debt for the rest of her natural life. We are perfectly comfortable taking that risk, Elijah replied smoothly, standing up and buttoning his jacket. We decline the mediation. Have a wonderful day. Trey scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a look of pure disgust. You are just as stupid and stubborn as you have always been, Jada. We offered you a lifeline and you just threw it away. Do not come crying to my wife when the judge officially freezes you out of the estate. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my charcoal suit. I looked at my mother, who finally glanced up from her phone just to offer me a look of deep, pathetic pity. I did not say a single word. I simply turned and walked out of the conference room with Elijah right beside me. We had given them the perfect opportunity to withdraw their fraudulent evidence, and instead they had doubled down on their massive federal crime. As we stepped into the private elevator, Elijah let out a low, satisfied chuckle. They formally filed the forged tax returns into the court record, cementing their felony. They truly believe they have completely won. Let them celebrate, I said, watching the elevator numbers count down to the lobby. Let them throw a party. Let them think I am currently shaking in terror. They are completely blinded by their own extreme greed. When we reached the ground floor, Elijah headed toward his car, and I walked out into the busy downtown parking garage. The air was thick and heavy, typical for an Atlanta afternoon. I found my unassuming sedan parked near the exit. As I reached for the door handle, I heard the aggressive, heavy footsteps of expensive leather shoes echoing across the concrete floor. Hey, Jada, wait a second, Trey called out, jogging slightly to catch up with me. I had clearly rushed down the stairs to corner me before I could leave. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed with adrenaline from the mediation session. He stepped aggressively into my personal space, blocking me from opening my car door. You really think you can play hardball with me? Trey demanded, his voice echoing loudly in the empty parking structure. I manage millions of dollars for the most elite families in this city. You are absolutely nothing. I am a king in Atlanta, Jada. I just secured a $10 million commercial lease for my new headquarters in the most prestigious building downtown. My company is expanding rapidly. I own this city. I looked at him, studying the frantic, desperate energy hiding just beneath his arrogant bragging. He was trying so hard to project massive wealth, completely unaware that I already knew he was aggressively hemorrhaging money and illegally stealing from his own clients to cover his massive debts. Is that right, Trey? I asked quietly, maintaining a perfectly blank expression. You just secured a new commercial lease. $10 million, Jada, he repeated, puffing out his chest proudly. We move into the top 3 floors of the Pinnacle Tower next month. While you are getting evicted from your miserable little apartment, I am going to be running an absolute empire. You should have taken the settlement. By next month, you are going to be sleeping in a homeless shelter. He smirked, stepping back to let me open my car door, clearly satisfied that he had delivered the ultimate crushing insult. See you in court, little sister, he mocked, turning around and strutting back toward the elevators. I smiled politely, got into my understated sedan, and closed the heavy door. The moment I was safely inside the soundproof cabin, I let out a genuine, deeply amused laugh. Trey just bragged about his massive new commercial lease at the Pinnacle Tower. He thought he was intimidating me with his incredible financial success. He had absolutely no idea that Vanguard Holdings had aggressively purchased the Pinnacle Tower 3 months ago. I was the secret owner of the building. I was literally his new commercial landlord. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and immediately called my lead commercial asset manager. It rang once before she answered. Good afternoon, Madam CEO, she said professionally. Good afternoon, Sarah, I replied, starting the engine. I need you to pull up the commercial lease agreement for Trey's investment firm at the Pinnacle Tower. I have it right here, Sarah confirmed after a few seconds of typing. They just signed the preliminary agreement for the top 3 floors last week. Have they completely cleared the mandatory 30-day grace period for their initial deposit? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, Madam CEO. The initial deposit was due 2 days ago. They requested a brief extension, citing a temporary banking delay. I smiled, steering my car out of the dark parking garage and into the bright Atlanta sunlight. Trey was stalling because he was desperately waiting to steal my half of the trust fund to cover his massive commercial deposit. He didn't have the cash. Cancel their lease immediately. I commanded, my voice carrying absolute authority. They missed the deadline. Terminate the contract. Do not grant any extensions. Lock the doors to those floors today. Understood, Madam CEO, Sarah replied instantly. I will issue the formal termination notice and lock the doors within the hour. I ended the call and merged onto the busy highway. Trey thought he was a king who owned the entire city. He was about to find out that his entire fake empire was built on land that I completely controlled. The first domino had just been officially pushed over, and the complete destruction of their fraudulent lives was about to begin. Elijah and I stood up from the oak table in perfect unison. We offered no handshakes or parting pleasantries. I simply picked up my purse, turned my back on my mother's disappointed glare, and walked out of the glass-walled conference room. The doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the sound of Sasha's lawyers scrambling to reorganize their files. The quiet hallway was lined with modern art and plush carpets that absorbed our footsteps. Elijah pressed the elevator button, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. They took the bait completely, he whispered, as the steel doors slid open. They officially entered those forged tax returns into the legal record. They are locked in. I nodded, watching the floor numbers descend. Let them enjoy their false victory for the rest of the afternoon. We walked through the bustling law firm lobby and out into the humid Atlanta air. Elijah headed toward the valet to retrieve his car, while I walked toward the underground parking garage where I had parked my unassuming sedan. The concrete structure was dimly lit, echoing with distant city traffic. I pulled my keys from my purse, enjoying the solitude. But that peace was shattered by the sound of aggressive, heavy footsteps echoing rapidly behind me. Hey, wait right there! Jada Trey shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete pillars. I did not speed up or turn around immediately. I walked calmly to my car, unlocking the doors with a soft chirp. Before I could reach the door handle, Trey sprinted the last few yards and planted himself between me and my vehicle. He was breathing heavily, sweat visible on his forehead from running down the stairs. He smelled of stale coffee and overpowering cologne. He leaned his arm against my car's roof, trying to physically box me in. He wanted to use his size to intimidate me, a classic tactic for men who lacked actual power. You think you are so smart walking away from a generous settlement like that? Trey sneered, his chest heaving as he glared down at me. You think your silent treatment makes you look strong? But you are just as stupid as your mother always said you were. You threw away your only lifeline. I stood my ground, refusing to shrink from his aggressive posture. Is that what you ran all the way down here to tell me, Trey? I asked, keeping my voice flat and devoid of emotion. He laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the concrete walls. I came down here to give you a reality check, little sister, he said, stepping closer. You do not understand who you are dealing with. I manage millions for the most elite families in this city. I am a king in Atlanta. Trey puffed out his chest, consumed by his own delusions of grandeur. While you have been hiding in your cheap apartment doing nothing for 5 years, Sasha and I have been building a real estate empire. Do you know what I achieved this morning before I even walked into that mediation room? I just secured a $10 million commercial lease for my new corporate headquarters. It is the top 3 floors of the Pinnacle Tower, the most prestigious commercial building in the entire downtown district. He paused, waiting for my eyes to widen in shock. When I offered no reaction, his sneer deepened into a vicious scowl. We move in next month, he bragged, pointing a finger at my face. My company is expanding globally. I am sitting on top of the world, Jada. You are nothing. I manage your mother's finances now. I have contacted the bank and frozen your primary debit cards pending the litigation. You do not have a dime to hire a lawyer. By the time my lawyers are done draining you in court, you will not afford gas. Go back to the slums, Jada. I stared at him, observing the desperate energy hiding behind his arrogant bragging. He was trying hard to project massive, untouchable wealth, but I could see the truth written in the tension around his eyes and the tremor in his hands. A truly wealthy man does not need to corner a woman in a parking garage to brag about cutting her off. A wealthy man does not sweat nervously through his silk shirt while threatening his sister-in-law. He was bleeding money and he needed my half of the trust fund to plug the catastrophic holes in his sinking business. You should have taken the money we offered you upstairs, Trey spat, slamming his hand against my car window, because now we are taking everything. By next month, while I am looking down at the city from my penthouse office at the Pinnacle Tower, you will be sleeping in a homeless shelter. You are finished. I looked at his furious face and let a heavy silence stretch between us. I did not defend myself. I did not point out his glaring insecurities. I simply offered him a polite, unbothered smile. Congratulations on the new lease, Trey, I said softly, my voice smooth and polite. The Pinnacle Tower is a beautiful building. Try to enjoy the view while it lasts. I stepped forward, forcing him to move out of my way, or physically assault me. He hesitated for a second before stepping aside, his expression twisting into deep confusion at my absolute lack of fear. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. Have a wonderful afternoon, Trey, I added, pulling the door shut before he could utter another word. As I started the engine, I looked through the glass and saw him glaring at my car, shaking his head in disgust. He turned around and marched back toward the elevator banks, completely convinced he had delivered the ultimate crushing defeat. The moment I pulled out of the parking garage and merged into the traffic of downtown Atlanta, I let out a genuine, very deep laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, filling the quiet cabin of my car with pure amusement. Trey had just bragged about his commercial lease at the Pinnacle Tower. I thought he was terrifying me with his financial success and his elite corporate status. He honestly believed he was a king looking down on a peasant. He had absolutely no idea that Vanguard Holdings had aggressively purchased the Pinnacle Tower 3 months ago in an all-cash acquisition. I was the secret founder and CEO of the private equity firm managing over $300 million in assets. I was the absolute owner of that exact building. I was literally his new commercial landlord. The irony of his threat was almost too poetic to be real. He was boasting about an empire built entirely on land that I completely controlled. He was threatening to leave me homeless while blindly handing me the keys to his destruction. Trey freezing that decoy account containing exactly $412 was just the icing on the cake. He thought he had cut my financial throat, not realizing I possessed the power to evict his entire company with a single phone call. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and called my lead commercial asset manager. The line rang once before she answered. "Good afternoon, Madam CEO," she said professionally, her keyboard clicking in the background. "Good afternoon, Chloe," I replied. "Pull up the commercial lease agreement for Trey's investment firm at the Pinnacle Tower." "I have it right here on my screen," Chloe confirmed. "They just signed the preliminary agreement for the top 3 floors last week." "Have they completely cleared the mandatory 30-day grace period for their initial deposit?" I asked. "No, Madam CEO. The initial deposit was due 2 days ago. They requested a brief extension this morning, citing a temporary banking delay." I smiled, watching the glass skyscrapers of Atlanta passing by my windows. Trey was stalling because he was desperately waiting to steal my half of the trust fund to cover his commercial deposit. He did not have the cash. He was completely broke. "Cancel their lease immediately," I commanded, my voice carrying absolute authority. Trey's firm missed their grace period for the deposit. Terminate the contract. Do not grant any extensions under any circumstances. I want you to lock the doors to those floors today. Understood, Madam CEO, Chloe replied instantly. "I will issue the formal termination notice and lock the doors within the hour. No one will enter." "Perfect," I said. "Thank you, Chloe." I ended the call and merged onto the highway. Trey thought he was a king who owned the entire city. He thought freezing my decoy account would ever make me surrender. He was about to find out that his entire fake empire was built on land that I completely controlled. The first domino had just been pushed over, and the complete destruction of their fraudulent lives was about to begin. The following morning, the bright Atlanta sun illuminated the towering glass facade of the Pinnacle Tower. Trey arrived at the prestigious downtown building feeling like an absolute king. He had hired an expensive local camera crew to shoot a flashy promotional video for his company's social media pages. He wanted to show the entire city his massive new corporate headquarters. He strutted into the polished marble lobby wearing a bright blue custom-tailored suit, checking his expensive watch for the cameras. He flashed his brightest fake smile, treating the building staff like his personal servants. The camera crew followed closely behind him, capturing his every move as he stepped into the private executive elevator. Trey pressed the button for the top floor, expecting to walk into his sprawling new domain. He was already rehearsing his arrogant speech about wealth and success. The elevator chimed softly, and the heavy steel doors slid open. Trey stepped out, spreading his arms wide for the cameras. But his practiced smile vanished instantly. The grand glass doors of his new office were wrapped in heavy steel chains and secured with massive industrial padlocks. Trey froze, staring in absolute disbelief. Plastered directly in the center of the glass doors was a bright red legal notice. It was a formal eviction and lease termination document. The camera crew kept rolling, capturing the exact moment his arrogant facade completely shattered. Trey rushed forward, grabbing the heavy steel chains, rattling them aggressively. He shouted at the camera crew to stop filming, but they were already live broadcasting his humiliating meltdown to his social media followers. Two large security guards stepped off the nearby freight elevator. They approached Trey with stern expressions, informing him that his lease had been officially terminated due to non-payment. They loudly ordered him to leave the premises immediately or face criminal trespassing charges. Trey's face turned crimson with rage and profound embarrassment. He tried to argue, claiming he was a wealthy investment broker who basically owned the city, but the guards simply crossed their arms and pointed toward the exit. As Trey was publicly escorted out of the building in front of the rolling cameras, his cell phone began to ring frantically. It was his primary financial investor. My corporate team had ensured that several prominent Atlanta business journals received an anonymous tip about the sudden eviction. The news of Trey's catastrophic failure was already circulating through the financial district. Trey answered the phone, his voice trembling with sheer panic. The investor screamed through the receiver, demanding an immediate withdrawal of his entire portfolio. Trey stammered, making pathetic excuses, but the investor hung up. Trey stood on the bustling downtown sidewalk, completely locked out of his fake empire, sweating profusely in his expensive blue suit. He rushed back to his car, speeding recklessly toward his sprawling mansion in Buckhead. He burst through the heavy front doors, breathing heavily, his eyes wild with pure desperation. Sasha was lounging comfortably by their massive backyard pool, sipping an iced coffee and looking through expensive fabric swatches for her upcoming courtroom appearances. She wanted to look perfectly stylish when she ripped my inheritance away. Trey ran out to the patio, knocking over a small table in his frantic haste. He looked absolutely terrified. He told Sasha that the lease was terminated and they were officially locked out of the Pinnacle Tower. He explained that the video of his eviction was already spreading online, and their biggest investors were aggressively pulling their money out of the firm. They were hemorrhaging cash at a catastrophic rate. Sasha dropped her fabric swatches, her perfectly manicured hands beginning to shake. The reality of their terrifying situation finally crashed down on her. She realized they were completely out of liquid capital. Their aggressive legal team required a massive retainer replenishment by Friday morning, or they would immediately drop the trust fund lawsuit against me. Sasha knew that if they dropped the lawsuit, they would not be able to steal my half of the inheritance. If they could not steal my money, they could not cover up the millions of dollars Trey had already illegally embezzled. Panic consumed her completely. She knew they were standing on the absolute edge of federal prison. Trey grabbed her shoulders, begging her to find a way to get cash today. He told her they needed millions just to keep the lawyers working and the angry investors temporarily satisfied. Sasha's mind raced frantically until she landed on her favorite reliable target. She knew exactly who to manipulate. Sasha drove her luxury sports car straight to my mother, Vivica lavish estate. She did not bother knocking. She burst into the grand foyer, sobbing hysterically, playing the role of the perfect devastated victim. My mother was sitting in the formal living room, reviewing invitation lists for her next high society charity luncheon. When she saw her golden child crying, she immediately dropped her papers and rushed over, wrapping her arms around Sasha. Sasha wailed loudly, burying her face in our mother's shoulder. She spun a highly fabricated, incredibly manipulative story. She claimed that I was actively using my remaining savings to hire shady lawyers to destroy her business. She lied through her teeth, telling Vivica that I had somehow manipulated the local banks to freeze Trey corporate accounts out of pure malicious jealousy. She painted me as an evil, vindictive monster who was trying to ruin the family reputation just because I was a bitter, unemployed failure. My mother listened to the vicious lies, and her hatred for me deepened into a blinding rage. She could not stand the thought of her favorite daughter suffering, while I supposedly paraded around ruining their lives. Sasha looked up with tears streaming down her face and delivered the ultimate manipulation. She told Vivica they just needed a temporary bridge loan. She promised they would pay her back with massive interest the second they won the lawsuit, and stripped me of my trust fund. She begged our mother to save their beautiful empire from my alleged cruelty. Vivica was entirely blinded by her obsession with Sasha's elite social status. She valued the fake image of their perfection more than anything else in the world. She could not bear the thought of her country club friends finding out that Sasha and Trey were struggling financially. It would absolutely destroy the pristine family legacy she had spent decades curating. "Do not cry, my beautiful girl," Vivica said soothingly, wiping the fake tears from Sasha's cheeks. "I will not let that ungrateful parasite ruin your beautiful life. I will take care of everything right now." My mother walked over to her antique writing desk and opened her laptop. She logged into her primary wealth management portal. She did not hesitate for a single second. Driven by her toxic favoritism and her burning desire to see me completely destroyed in federal court, she initiated a massive, catastrophic transfer. She authorized the complete liquidation of her entire remaining retirement portfolio. She took every single dollar she and my father had saved over 40 years of hard work and transferred it directly into Trey fraudulent corporate accounts. Sasha stood behind her, watching the screen load with a greedy, desperate light in her eyes. When the transfer confirmation appeared, Sasha hugged our mother tightly, praising her generosity and calling her the savior of the family. Vivica beamed with pride, genuinely believing she had just protected her legacy from ruin. She thought she was financing the final legal battle that would permanently erase me from their lives. She had absolutely no idea she had just handed her entire life savings to a sinking ship. She did not know that Trey needed that money just to cover his illegal gambling debts and his angry investors. She did not realize that the money was already gone the second she pressed confirm. Vivica smiled proudly as Sasha drove away to pay the ruthless lawyers. My mother was completely satisfied, believing she had successfully funded my ultimate destruction. She was now entirely destitute, living in a massive mansion she could no longer afford, holding on to an illusion that was about to shatter into a million pieces. Back at my penthouse office at Vanguard Holdings, I sat quietly behind my polished mahogany desk, watching the digital alerts light up my secure computer monitor. My elite cybersecurity team was monitoring the massive influx of cash hitting Trey business accounts. Elijah walked into my office holding a fresh cup of coffee. He leaned over my desk, looking at the sprawling financial graphs on my screen. "She actually did it," Elijah said, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "Your mother just willingly liquidated her entire retirement portfolio. She handed over every single penny to a man who is actively under federal investigation for massive wire fraud." I stared at the staggering numbers on the screen, feeling a cold sense of finality settle deep in my chest. They marched toward their own destruction. "She never had a job, she is lying." My sister shrieked those words at the federal judge, demanding I be stripped of our late father's trust fund. She thought she had me completely cornered. She genuinely believed I was just her broke, pathetic younger sister, who had achieved absolutely nothing since our father passed away. She smiled at the packed gallery, radiating arrogant confidence in her inevitable victory. But then my lawyer stepped forward and handed the judge a single sealed envelope. The judge opened the file, his face instantly draining of color. He looked right at my sister, his expression a mix of absolute shock and pity, before saying two words that would send her straight to federal prison. "All rise. My name is Jada." I am 32 years old, and for the last 5 years, I have let my highly toxic status obsessed family believe I was a massive failure. As a successful private equity founder, I easily could have crushed them years ago, but I chose to escape their constant manipulation and live a quiet life instead. Last Saturday, they invited me to my mother's lavish 60th birthday gala in Atlanta. Between the flowing champagne and the string quartet, my sister leaned into a microphone and humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. I simply picked up the lawsuit she threw at my feet and smiled. That night, I initiated a financial sequence that would permanently erase her fake empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who severely underestimated your true worth. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood tall and imposing. The morning air was thick with the usual southern humidity, but as I stepped through the metal detectors with Elijah by my side, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold clinical focus. Today was the day. The final stage of the trap was fully set. We walked down the long, polished corridor toward courtroom 4B. I could hear the loud, obnoxious chatter echoing down the hall long before we even reached the doors. Sasha and my mother had turned this federal hearing into an exclusive social event. They had invited half of Buckhead. When Elijah pushed the heavy doors open, the noise immediately died down. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity. My mother's sorority sisters were sitting in the front rows wearing their signature colors and clutching designer handbags. Wealthy politicians, local business owners, and real estate developers who did business with Trey filled the remaining wooden benches. They had all come to watch the lazy, unemployed younger sister get publicly stripped of her inheritance. They wanted blood. They wanted a dramatic show. I walked down the center aisle, keeping my head high and my posture perfectly straight. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit with no visible branding. I looked exactly like the humble, struggling woman they desperately wanted me to be. Whispers rippled through the gallery as I passed. I heard a woman in the second row scoff loudly, whispering to her friend about how disrespectful it was for me to even show my face today. I took my seat at the defense table next to Elijah. He calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out a single thin file folder. He placed it neatly on the table. Across the aisle, the plaintiff's table looked like a crowded circus. Sasha was wearing a conservative but incredibly expensive navy dress, playing the part of the serious, burdened businesswoman. Trey sat beside her, whispering to their lead attorney, looking completely arrogant and self-satisfied. My mother, Vivica, sat directly behind them in the first row of the gallery. She refused to look at me. She kept her chin tilted up, exuding a toxic mix of pride and sheer contempt. The bailiff announced the arrival of the federal judge. Everyone in the packed courtroom stood up. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and decades of experience on the bench, took his seat and immediately called the court to order. He looked down at the massive stack of paperwork Trey's legal team had submitted, then looked over at Elijah and me. The plaintiff's lead attorney stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He delivered a highly dramatic, overly rehearsed opening statement about my father's legacy. He claimed that DeAndre's wealth was meant to build the community, not subsidize laziness. He painted a picture of Sasha and Trey as the ultimate stewards of that legacy, working tirelessly to honor my father's memory. Then he pointed a sharp finger directly at me, declaring that I had spent the last 5 years mocking that legacy by refusing to work a single day in my entire life. I did not react. I simply stared back at him, my face a mask of absolute stone. The attorney then called his first witness to the stand. Sasha stood up, smoothed her expensive dress, and walked gracefully to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony was physically nauseating. Sasha sat down and adjusted the microphone. Her attorney approached the podium with a gentle, encouraging smile. He asked her to describe her relationship with me and my professional history since our father passed away. Sasha took a deep breath and the performance officially began. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. She let out a shaky, trembling sigh that echoed through the courtroom speakers. I have tried so hard to help Jada. Sasha said, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. When our father died, it hit us all very hard. But Trey and I used that grief to build our business. We wanted to make Dad proud. Jada just gave up. She moved into a terrible apartment and completely shut us out. I offered her jobs at my company. I offered to pay for her to go back to school or get a real estate license. She refused every single offer. She told me she did not need to work because the trust fund would take care of her forever. A collective gasp echoed from my mother's friends in the gallery. Sasha wiped a perfectly timed tear from her cheek. She is lazy. Sasha continued, shaking her head sadly. She is completely unemployed. She spends her days doing absolutely nothing while expecting to reap the rewards of my father's hard work. It breaks my heart to do this to my own sister. But I have to protect my father's legacy. Jada just wants to leech off the family. She has never earned a single dollar on her own. The attorney walked over to his table and picked up a stack of documents. He approached the witness stand and handed them to Sasha. Can you identify these documents for the court? The attorney asked loudly. Sasha looked down at the paperwork. Her face was the picture of solemn duty. Yes, she said clearly. These are Jada's federal tax returns for the past 5 years. My husband Trey manages the family estate, and he pulled these to verify her employment status. As you can see, she has reported zero income, zero wages, zero business revenue. She has contributed absolutely nothing to society. The attorney turned to the judge and formally requested that the tax returns be entered into evidence. The judge nodded, officially cementing the forged documents into the federal court record. I looked at Elijah. He did not move a muscle, but I could see the slight predatory glint in his eyes. Sasha had just committed federal perjury. She had sworn under oath that those documents were real. The trap had firmly closed around her ankles. The attorney thanked Sasha, and she stepped down from the stand, wiping her eyes with a tissue. She walked back to her table, casting a quick, victorious smirk in my direction when the judge was not looking. She thought she had just won the entire case. Next, the plaintiff's attorney called Vivica to the stand. My mother stood up from the gallery. She wore a tailored white suit and a string of authentic pearls. She walked to the stand with the regal, commanding presence of a queen defending her kingdom. She swore the oath and took her seat. Mrs. Vivica, the attorney, began gently. As a mother, this must be incredibly difficult for you. Can you tell the court about your youngest daughter's employment history? Vivica looked directly at me. For a brief second, I wondered if she would actually go through with it. I wondered if the maternal bond, no matter how fractured or toxic, would prevent her from lying under federal oath just to destroy her own child. My mother locked eyes with me, and her expression turned to pure, unadulterated ice. She did not hesitate. Elijah did not hesitate for another second. He stepped forward from our defense table, smoothing the lapel of his tailored suit, and walked deliberately toward the judge's bench with an air of absolute authority. The courtroom had grown dead silent, the weight of my mother's false testimony still lingering heavily in the air. Everyone present expected us to fold, to offer a quiet settlement or meekly ask for mercy. Instead, Elijah reached into his slim leather briefcase and retrieved a heavy official manila folder embossed with federal seals. Your Honor. Elijah began, his deep, resonant voice cutting cleanly through the quiet room. In light of the profoundly misleading testimony just provided by the plaintiff and her supporting witnesses, the defense finds it necessary to correct the record immediately. I am formally submitting into evidence the true, fully authenticated federal tax returns for my client, Jada Brooks, covering the exact same 5-year period specified in the trust dispute. Alongside these documents, I am also entering the official corporate registration filings, audited revenue reports, and state compliance certificates currently registered with the Department of Revenue. At the plaintiff's table, Sasha's lead attorney bolted upright as if he had just been struck by lightning. He snatched his reading glasses off his face and looked toward the judge with frantic confusion. Objection, Your Honor! The opposing lawyer shouted, his voice cracking with sudden panic. This is entirely procedural subterfuge. The defense cannot simply introduce unverified corporate papers at this stage of the trial without proper prior notice. These documents are clearly fabricated to distract from the clear violation of the trust stipulations. Elijah didn't even blink. He turned slowly to face the opposing counsel with a calm, razor-sharp smile. These documents are fully verified, counsel. They are authenticated directly by the Internal Revenue Service and bear the digital signatures of federal compliance officers. They are entirely legitimate, unlike the amateurish forgeries your client illegally downloaded and submitted under penalty of perjury. A sharp wave of murmurs erupted across the packed courtroom gallery. The judge raised a single commanding hand, silencing the room instantly with a stern glare. He looked down at the sealed federal documents resting on his bench, then looked up at Elijah. Counsel, are you stating for the record that these documents originate directly from federal tax databases and bear official certification? The judge asked, his tone sharp and scrutinizing. Yes, Your Honor, without a single shadow of a doubt, Elijah answered firmly. We request permission from the court to project these authenticated files onto the main courtroom display screen so that all present, including the plaintiff and her legal team, can examine the verifiable truth regarding my client's professional life. Permission granted, the judge ruled, nodding slowly. Let the record show the defense exhibits are officially entered into evidence. Within seconds, the large digital screens mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The high-resolution display illuminated the entire room with crisp, undeniable financial data. Bold lettering appeared at the top of the projection: Vanguard Holdings, LLC, Consolidated Annual Financial Audit. Below it, a detailed breakdown of corporate assets, multi-million-dollar payroll disbursements, and corporate tax compliance records spanning the last 5 years were laid out in undeniable clarity. The atmosphere in the courtroom instantly transformed from tense anticipation to suffocating shock. Sasha's lead attorney stared at the screen, his face turning pale as he frantically began shuffling through his disorganized papers, whispering urgent, panicked instructions to his junior associates. Across the aisle, Trey gripped the edge of the oak table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. He stared at the glowing projection, his eyes wide with absolute terror, realizing that his amateur forgery had just been completely dismantled by federal-grade data. Elijah walked slowly away from the defense table, his hands resting casually inside his pockets, and turned his gaze directly toward the plaintiff's table, where my sister sat frozen in absolute horror. Mrs. Sasha, Elijah addressed her smoothly, his voice carrying an edge of razor-sharp irony. You stood right there on that witness stand just moments ago, shedding tears for the court, and swore under oath that my client has never earned a single dollar, that she is a lazy, unemployed parasite who leeches off her family. Is that correct? Is that the narrative you want this federal court to believe? Sasha swallowed hard, her throat visibly tightening. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully rehearsed confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Answer the question, counselor, the judge instructed sternly, looking directly at Sasha. Sasha gripped the edges of her chair, her voice trembling slightly as she forced the words past her lips. Yes, that is what I said, because it is the truth. She has no job. She has never had a real job. Elijah turned back toward the massive projection screen, pointing a finger at the glowing financial figures displayed in bright, unignorable white text. If my client is truly unemployed and penniless, Mrs. Sasha, can you please read for the court the total gross revenue of Vanguard Holdings listed right here on page 4 for the last fiscal year? Silence descended over the courtroom. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. Every single eye in the gallery shifted back and forth between the glowing screen and my sister. Sasha stared at the towering numbers, her chest heaving as she fought for air. Her face completely drained of all color, leaving her looking ghostly and frail under the harsh courtroom lights. She opened her mouth, stammering incoherently as she tried to form a sentence. I cannot. I do not know what I'm looking at. Sasha stammered, her voice cracking desperately. Read the numbers, Mrs. Sasha. Elijah repeated, stepping closer to her with an unyielding, piercing gaze. Read the total gross revenue for the company my client built from the ground up. Sasha squeezed her eyes shut for a brief second, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes, before she whispered the words that completely shattered her entire fake empire. $200 million. Sasha whispered, the confession echoing hollowly through the silent room. The courtroom instantly erupted into absolute uncontainable chaos. Gasps and shouts of shock bounced off the high wooden walls. The wealthy socialites in the gallery stood up from their benches, craning their necks to get a better look at the projection screen, whispering furiously among themselves. Trey buried his face in his hands, letting out a muffled groan of utter despair as he realized their massive fraud had completely unraveled in front of a federal judge. Up in the gallery, my mother Vivica let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She clutched her chest with both hands, swaying unsteadily in her seat. Her sorority sisters rushed to support her as she nearly fainted right there in the courtroom, completely overwhelmed by the staggering realization that the daughter she had mocked, abused, and cast aside was an elite multimillionaire titan. At the plaintiff's table, the four expensive corporate lawyers lost all professional composure. They frantically shuffled their papers, dropping folders, frantically flipping through legal pads, and glaring at Trey with looks of pure murderous intent. They realized with absolute horror that they had been completely and utterly blindsided, tricked into representing a pair of fraudulent criminals who had lied to them about every single detail of the case. Elijah let the roaring chaos of the courtroom wash over the room for a few long, delicious seconds before turning back to address the bench. "Your Honor," Elijah stated, clearly raising his voice above the noise of the gallery. "As the official corporate registration documents and federal filings clearly demonstrate, my client, Jada Brooks, is not only gainfully employed, she is the sole founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings. She has not just held a job. Over the past 5 years, through her visionary leadership and relentless hard work, she has created thousands of high-paying jobs, driven major economic growth across the country, and managed hundreds of millions of dollars in global assets. The plaintiff's entire lawsuit is a malicious, fraudulent fabrication designed solely to misappropriate wealth that belongs entirely to my client." The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order in the courtroom as the bailiffs rushed down the aisles to quiet the stunned crowd. The absolute look of defeat on Sasha's face was a masterpiece of poetic justice, cementing the turning point of the trial into absolute history. The chaos in the courtroom continued to swell until the judge struck his gavel a third time, demanding absolute silence. Sasha's lead attorney wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He was desperately trying to salvage a case that had just exploded in his face. He scrambled to his feet, gripping the edges of his podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Objection, Your Honor," the opposing attorney shouted, lacking his previous bravado. "This presentation is an orchestrated distraction. The defense is blinding the court with flashy numbers. The fact remains, the plaintiff submitted returns, proving the defendant earned zero personal income. Corporate wealth does not equate to gainful employment. We stand by the submitted documents." Elijah let out a slow, deliberate laugh. It was a cold sound that made the opposing counsel flinch. Elijah turned his back to the projection screen and walked directly toward the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor," Elijah said, locking eyes with Trey, who was now visibly trembling in his custom suit. "The opposing counsel is absolutely right about one thing. We must look very closely at the documents they submitted. The defense asserts that those specific tax returns are entirely irrelevant to my client's employment status because they are malicious, highly illegal fabrications. The documents submitted by the plaintiff were forged by Mr. Trey using his professional broker credentials." Trey jumped out of his seat, his chair crashing backward onto the marble floor. "That is a lie," Trey screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Elijah. "She set me up. I pulled those files from the legitimate family estate portal." "Sit down immediately," the judge roared, leaning over the bench. "One more outburst and you will spend the night in a holding cell." Trey slowly picked up his chair and sat down, breathing heavily. Sasha refused to look at him. She was staring blankly at the floor, completely paralyzed by the unfolding disaster. Elijah returned to our table and picked up a new file folder. To prove the origin of these forged documents and to demonstrate the extreme financial desperation motivating this entire fraudulent lawsuit, the defense calls our next witness to the stand. I call Marcus Vance a certified forensic accountant and federal financial investigator. A tall, sharp-looking man in a dark suit walked through the gallery doors and made his way to the witness box. He swore the oath and took his seat. Elijah approached the stand, projecting a new set of data onto the courtroom screens. It was a complex web of digital IP addresses, server logs, and encrypted bank transfers. Mr. Vance, Elijah began smoothly. Can you please explain to the court exactly how the plaintiffs obtained the tax returns they submitted as evidence yesterday? The forensic accountant adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the judge. Certainly, the accountant stated in a clear, authoritative tone. Yesterday afternoon, an unauthorized user attempted to access Jada Brooks's secure financial portals. We traced the digital footprint directly to the primary IP address registered to Trey's commercial real estate office. Furthermore, the user bypassed standard security firewalls by utilizing Trey's active federal broker identification number. The user then downloaded a set of fabricated tax returns from a decoy server and submitted them to this court. It was a deliberate, premeditated act of digital forgery and identity theft. The judge turned his fierce gaze toward Trey. The plaintiff's legal team physically shrank away from their own client, realizing they had been used as pawns to commit a severe federal crime. Elijah paced in front of the jury box, his voice growing louder and more commanding. And why would a supposedly wealthy, successful real estate mogul risk federal prison to forge his sister-in-law's tax returns? Elijah asked. Mr. Vance, did your investigation reveal the current financial status of Trey's highly publicized corporate empire? Yes, it did, the accountant replied firmly. We conducted a comprehensive financial autopsy of his entire corporate structure. Trey does not run a successful real estate empire. He operates a catastrophic Ponzi scheme. His commercial properties have been operating at a massive loss for over 2 years. To cover his exorbitant personal lifestyle and his mounting corporate debt, he began illegally moving money. Elijah stopped pacing. Moving money from where exactly? The accountant pointed to a series of highlighted bank transfers on the projection screen. He has been actively embezzling money from his private investment clients. Over the past 18 months, Trey has stolen exactly $4 million from various protected accounts to pay off his illegal gambling debts and prevent his commercial properties from entering immediate foreclosure. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked gasps. Wealthy socialites in the gallery who had invested their own money with Trey suddenly started pulling out their phones, frantically checking their banking apps. The sheer panic in the room was palpable. Trey buried his face in his hands, completely broken. Sasha looked at him with pure disgust, finally realizing her entire luxurious life was funded by stolen money. But Elijah was not finished. He turned away from the witness stand and walked slowly toward the gallery railing. He stopped directly in front of the first row, locking eyes with my mother. Vivica sat frozen in her expensive white suit, clutching her pearl necklace. She looked at Elijah with wide, terrified eyes. She was finally beginning to understand the catastrophic magnitude of her blind favoritism. Mr. Vance, Elijah said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that echoed clearly through the silent room. Did your forensic investigation track exactly which specific family accounts Trey targeted to cover his massive illegal debts? Yes, we did, the accountant answered solemnly. 3 months ago, facing an immediate commercial loan default, Trey utilized his capacity as the family's financial manager to breach the primary estate accounts. He successfully bypassed the authorization protocols and stole $1.5 million directly from the late DeAndre Brooks's protected family trust. Vivica let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She looked at Sasha, seeking some kind of denial, but Sasha just kept her eyes glued to the floor. The golden child was entirely complicit in robbing her own father's grave. And the rest of the stolen funds? Elijah asked, keeping his intense gaze locked firmly on my mother. Where did Trey get the remaining capital to keep his fraudulent business afloat? The accountant pulled up a final, devastating financial graph on the projection screen. The remaining stolen funds were forcefully extracted from the private retirement portfolios of Mrs. Vivica Brooks, the accountant stated clearly. Over the course of the last 48 hours, a complete liquidation order was executed. Every single dollar in Mrs. Vivica's primary savings investment and retirement accounts was drained and transferred into Trey's failing corporate shell companies. Mrs. Vivica Brooks is currently entirely destitute. Her accounts carry a balance of absolutely zero. A piercing, agonizing shriek ripped through the courtroom. Vivica collapsed forward, grabbing the wooden railing separating the gallery from the trial floor. She sobbed hysterically, her carefully crafted high society image completely shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The reality crashed down upon her with brutal, unforgiving force. The golden son-in-law she constantly praised had completely robbed her blind. The favorite daughter she worshipped had gladly helped him do it. She had actively conspired to strip me of my rightful inheritance, only to discover that her chosen allies had already left her absolutely penniless. Vivica reached her shaking hand out toward Sasha, demanding an explanation through her violent sobs. Sasha could not even look at her. Sasha just sat at the plaintiff's table, trembling with fear, realizing she was about to lose her mansion, her cars, her status, and her freedom. Elijah turned back to the judge, his posture projecting absolute, unyielding dominance. Your Honor, the plaintiffs did not bring this lawsuit to protect DeAndre Brooks's legacy. They brought this lawsuit because they were deeply drowning in debt. They desperately needed the court to award them my client's half of the trust fund so they could secretly replace the millions of dollars Trey had already stolen before anyone noticed. They dragged my client into this courtroom, subjected her to a vicious public smear campaign, and committed blatant perjury on the witness stand, all to cover up a massive ongoing federal crime. Sasha's lead attorney frantically stood up, grabbing his briefcase. Your Honor, the attorney stammered, his face pale with sheer terror. In light of this entirely new and deeply disturbing financial evidence, my legal team must immediately withdraw from representing the plaintiffs. We had absolutely no prior knowledge of any forged documents or embezzled funds. We were completely lied to by our own clients. We formally request to be removed from this case right now. The judge nodded gravely, his expression filled with absolute disgust as he looked down at Sasha and Trey. Request granted, counselor. You and your team are formally dismissed. Trey and Sasha were left sitting entirely alone at their table. Their expensive lawyers marched swiftly out of the courtroom, leaving them completely defenseless against the crushing weight of their own criminal actions. They had walked into the federal building thinking they were untouchable predators, hunting a weak, unemployed target. They had no idea I had spent the last 5 years building a financial fortress that could withstand any attack. They had no idea that my silence was never a sign of weakness. It was a highly calculated, flawlessly executed strategy, specifically designed to let them completely and utterly destroy their own selves. The heavy doors slammed shut behind the retreating legal team, leaving Sasha and Trey isolated at the plaintiff table. The stark reality of their sudden abandonment hung heavily. Absolute silence reigned over the gallery. Then the dam of Sasha's sanity shattered. She sprang up from her chair, her dress catching on the edge of the polished oak table. She pointed a trembling finger directly at me. She never had a job, she is lying, Sasha screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She is a fraud. Do not look at those financial projections. She fabricated all of those Vanguard documents just to frame my husband. Jada has never earned a single dollar in her life. She is a parasite trying to steal our father's money. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down with explosive force, demanding strict order, but Sasha was unhinged. She turned frantically toward the gallery, looking for validation from her socialite friends. Her flawless makeup was beginning to run as hot tears of panic spilled down her face. She is lying to all of you, Sasha begged the gallery, her voice echoing shrilly. Trey is an honest investment broker. We are building an empire. My sister is jealous of our success. She hired fake accountants to project fake numbers. Tell them, Trey. Tell them she is making this all up. Trey did not say a single word. He remained slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the polished marble floor. He knew the game was over. The forensic evidence displayed on the courtroom screens was undeniable, tracing every stolen dollar directly to his personal accounts. He was a dead man walking, and he finally realized it. Mrs. Sasha, if you do not sit down and remain completely silent, this exact instant, I will hold you in contempt of court and have you physically restrained. the judge warned, his voice booming with lethal authority. Sasha slowly collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her shaking hands. She let out a loud, agonizing sob. She was finally realizing that her perfectly curated life of luxury elite status and arrogant superiority was permanently finished. I sat perfectly still beside Elijah, watching my sister unravel. I did not feel an ounce of pity. She had actively tried to leave me homeless and penniless just to fund her fraudulent lifestyle. She had manipulated our mother, mocked our father's legacy, and committed perjury without a second thought. Now the weight of her own malicious actions was crushing her. Elijah calmly organized his legal files, completely unbothered by Sasha's theatrical meltdown. He looked toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. The timing was absolutely perfect. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors swung open with a loud creak. The noise drew the attention of every person in the room. Two tall men wearing dark suits stepped into the courtroom. They moved with military precision. Their expressions were completely stoic, radiating undeniable federal authority. The silver badges clipped to their belts caught the lights. The gallery gasped collectively as the two federal agents marched straight down the center aisle. They did not look at the crowded gallery. They did not look at Sasha or Trey. They walked directly to our defense table. The lead agent reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily sealed white envelope bearing the official crest of the United States Department of Justice. He handed the sealed envelope directly to my attorney. Elijah accepted the envelope with a respectful nod. He turned away from the defense table and walked deliberately toward the bench. The entire courtroom held its collective breath. The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. Sasha gripped the edge of her table, watching the envelope change hands. "Your Honor," Elijah stated clearly, his voice echoing through the deafening silence. "I have just been handed an emergency priority document from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am formally submitting this sealed envelope to the court for your review." The judge frowned deeply, taking the heavy white envelope from Elijah's extended hand. He picked up his silver letter opener and sliced through the thick federal seal. He pulled out a large stack of crisp official documents. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the sharp rustle of the paper as the judge flipped through the pages. I watched the judge's face closely. His stern expression shifted dramatically. His jaw tightened. The color seemed to drain slightly from his weathered cheeks. He read the documents a second time, as if ensuring he had not misunderstood the severe magnitude of the contents. He looked down at the plaintiff's table. His intense gaze locked onto Trey, then shifted to Sasha. The look in the judge's eyes was a mixture of profound disgust and absolute uncompromising judgment. The judge slowly took off his reading glasses. He folded them carefully and placed them on the wooden bench. He looked out over the packed gallery, staring directly at the wealthy elite who had eagerly come to watch my planned destruction. "All rise," the judge commanded. His deep, authoritative voice boomed through the speakers. Every single person in the massive courtroom scrambled to their feet. The rustling of fabrics and the scraping of wooden benches filled the room. I stood up smoothly beside Elijah, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my face impassive. "This court is now in an immediate recess," the judge announced, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute doom. "We are not recessing to deliberate a verdict on the civil trust fund dispute. We are recessing because this civil matter has just been permanently superseded by a major federal criminal indictment." Sasha let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Trey closed his eyes, his broad shoulders slumping forward in total, irreversible defeat. "Federal arrest warrants have just been officially executed for the plaintiffs in this courtroom." The judge continued, pointing his wooden gavel directly at my sister and her husband. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation now has the floor." The judge struck his gavel one final time and quickly exited the bench, disappearing into his private chambers. The two federal agents immediately moved into aggressive action. They bypassed the defense table and marched straight towards Sasha and Trey. The gallery erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked screams and frantic whispering. People were pulling out their smartphones, desperate to capture the unbelievable downfall of Atlanta's most arrogant couple. Trey Vance, the lead agent, announced loudly, grabbing Trey by the shoulder and forcefully spinning him around. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and the embezzlement of over $5 million. The agent kicked Trey's legs apart and slammed his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the courtroom was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Trey did not fight back. He simply hung his head in pathetic disgrace as the cold steel locked tightly around his wrists. The second agent stepped directly in front of my sister. Sasha backed away, her hands raised defensively, shaking her head in pure absolute denial. "No," Sasha cried out, her voice trembling violently. "You cannot arrest me. I did not do anything wrong. I am a respected businesswoman. I just wanted my father's trust fund. I had no idea he was stealing money. Please, this is a massive mistake." Sasha Brooks, the second agent, stated coldly, grabbing her wrists and pulling them forcefully behind her back. "You are under federal arrest for felony conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and perjury in a federal courtroom. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The agent locked the heavy handcuffs tightly around Sasha's wrists. Sasha shrieked a wild, agonizing sound of pure terror. She twisted against the agent's grip, looking desperately toward the gallery. "Mom!" Sasha screamed, tears pouring down her face. "Mom, please help me. Do something. Call a lawyer. Tell them I am innocent. Please, Mom. Do not let them take me away." Vivica sat paralyzed, utterly broken. She realized the daughter she worshipped had conspired to steal everything she owned. She had no money left to hire a lawyer. She just stood there clutching her pearl necklace, trapped. "Mom," Sasha begged again as the agents dragged her toward the aisle. Vivica slowly turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes silently begged me for mercy. She wanted me to use my massive wealth to stop this. I held my mother's desperate gaze. I looked at her with cold, unwavering indifference. I reached down and calmly buttoned my tailored charcoal blazer. I turned my attention back to the center aisle. The federal agents marched Sasha and Trey toward the heavy oak doors. Sasha was still crying, pulling against the handcuffs, her expensive dress wrinkling, as she was paraded in front of her shocked high society friends. I stood perfectly tall, my shoulders squared, and watched them be escorted out of my life forever. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom slammed shut behind the federal agents, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. The wealthy socialites in the gallery who had come to watch my destruction were now desperately avoiding my gaze. They gathered their expensive designer bags and scurried out of the room like frightened mice. Elijah calmly clicked his leather briefcase shut. He looked at me with a quiet, knowing smile, acknowledging that we had executed our strategy with absolute perfection. I nodded in return, feeling a profound sense of lightness spreading through my chest. The heavy chains of my family toxic expectations had finally been broken. We walked together up the center aisle and stepped out into the expansive marble-lined corridor of the federal courthouse. The bright afternoon sunlight filtered through the high-arched windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. I was ready to walk out of this building and return to the massive empire I had built. But before I could take another step toward the exit, a frantic, trembling hand aggressively grabbed my forearm. I turned to see my mother. Vivica looked absolutely unrecognizable. Her pristine white tailored suit was wrinkled and highly disheveled. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined by dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. The arrogant high society matriarch who had confidently committed perjury just an hour ago was entirely gone. In her place stood a broken, terrified, and utterly penniless woman who had just realized the catastrophic consequences of her own blinding greed. "Jada. My baby, please," Vivica sobbed uncontrollably, her fingers digging desperately into my sleeve. "You have to help us. You have millions of dollars in your company. You have to bail Sasha out of federal custody right now today. You have to buy my house back from the bank before they foreclose on it. We are family, Jada. You cannot just leave your own mother and sister to suffer like this." I looked down at the woman who had brought me into this world. I looked at the woman who had happily conspired to leave me homeless, who had eagerly funded a malicious lawsuit to steal my rightful inheritance, and who had looked me dead in the eye while lying under oath to a federal judge. She did not feel any genuine remorse for the horrific things she had done to me. She was only crying because her chosen golden child was wearing handcuffs, and her own bank accounts were completely empty. I looked at my mother with cold, unwavering clarity. I did not raise my voice, but my words carried the sharp, lethal edge of absolute finality. You did not see me as family when you sat on that witness stand and lied under oath to leave me completely homeless. I stated firmly, my voice echoing down the quiet marble hallway. You actively chose to finance my destruction. You chose your glittering illusion of high society status over your own biological daughter. Now that illusion is permanently over. The fake empire you worshipped has burned to the ground. I have built my own real empire, and you will never see a single penny of it. I smoothly pulled my arm away from her frantic, desperate grip. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I simply turned my back on her and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the courthouse exit. I could hear her loud, agonizing wails echoing off the marble walls behind me, but I did not look back. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the bright, warm Atlanta sun. The air felt incredibly crisp and clean. For the first time in my entire life, I was breathing entirely on my own terms. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The spectacular fallout from the trust fund trial dominated the Atlanta business journals for weeks. The federal investigators moved with ruthless efficiency. Trey and Sasha were both denied bail due to the severe magnitude of their financial crimes and their clear status as flight risks. After facing a mountain of undeniable digital evidence provided directly by Vanguard Holdings and federal forensic accountants, their new public defenders advised them to take a plea deal. They are currently serving lengthy federal prison sentences in separate high-security facilities. Their flashy sports cars, their designer wardrobes, and their entire fake real estate portfolio were all seized by the federal government to pay back the clients Trey had so maliciously defrauded. My mother Vivica faced the brutal reality she had spent her entire life running away from. Without Trey's stolen money to prop up her lavish lifestyle, the bank swiftly foreclosed on her sprawling Buckhead estate. The high society friends she had desperately tried to impress instantly abandoned her, treating her like a social pariah. She is now living in a cramped, low-income apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely isolated and forced to survive entirely on a meager state pension. She has tried to contact my corporate office dozens of times, begging my assistants to connect her to me. I have never returned a single call. As for me, I am standing in the warm afternoon sun, looking up at Sasha and Trey, former mega mansion. It is a massive, sprawling estate with towering white columns and perfectly manicured lawns. When the federal government put the property up for a public foreclosure auction, Vanguard Holdings purchased it immediately in an all-cash transaction. I am not moving into this house. I stand alongside Elijah watching a group of workers carefully hang a sign directly over the front doors. The sign reads, "The DeAndre Youth Entrepreneurship Center." I have turned the ultimate symbol of my sister greed into a sanctuary for young, brilliant black minds. I smile truly unbothered, truly free, having finally executed the sweetest revenge of all overwhelming, undeniable, and beautifully absolute permanent corporate success.